Okay, I think we're about ready to roll here. There's seats in the front.
People coming to class.
I know, and this is you. We do have empty seats in the front. Hello. Brave people, you can come up front. It's so funny. Monica, good sign. Thank you. Guess we're going to have to set more seats up in the future. This is a good sign. Okay, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and start just because we have this semester with these new classes, we have a 45-minute slot for our classes. And then Monica, our speaker today, and our speaker in general will stay on for people who have questions for another 15 minutes. But we'll formally end the formal presentation at 11:30. Thank you. Okay, hi, I'm Jane Dutton. I'm one of the people involved in the Adult Faith Formation group, and I am so thrilled about this series about awakening compassion in our lives. This is the first of a 3-part series, and I'll give the pitch for the other wonderful 2 sessions that are coming after Monica. But just a brief introduction of my amazing colleague and friend, Monica Worline. I have known Monica for over 20 years. We are really lucky to have her here. She is the new faculty director for the Center for Positive Organizations at the Ross School of Business. But you should also know she was the CEO of a very successful consulting company called Enlivening Work. She is the head of the compassion research globally. There's people doing organizational compassion research globally. It used to be about 5 people, and now it's over 50. And Monica heads that. She is an extraordinary teacher, an amazing researcher. She got her PhD here, so we got her back from California, which is pretty amazing. But I thought I would just give you 6 adjectives to describe her. That none of this does justice, but they're all C's. And the C's is because it's compassion, right? So Monica, when I think of you, I think of courageous. I think of creative. You're going to see that in the slides. Collaborative, considerate, conscientious, and of course, compassionate. And I welcome Monica. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Jane, for the invitation to be here, everyone, for your time and beautiful faces this Sunday morning, and to Pastor Mel for the great impetus to get everyone to education today. It's working. When Jane asked me many months ago if I would be with you this Sunday, I immediately said yes. And then I started to wonder, what in the heck am I going to offer? And so I'm going to talk with you just a tiny bit about how we, over the past 20 plus years, have done research on compassion through a social science lens. But I also wanted, because where we are and the kind of gathering this is, to invite you to do a little bit of reflection on the idea of compassion as one of the hearts of what I'm going to ask you to hold loosely and interpret however you wish. One of the hearts of what I think of as a personal ministry. I teach MBA students who are going to go lead people and organizations I often ask them to consider that one of the challenges they could take up, if they wish, is that being in roles like that and being with people in that way, even in the realms of business that they're going to enter, could be the sacred work of their lives, right? By which I mean to invite them into trying to figure out how to be some kind of lovingly generative presence in the lives of the people that they touch, as they make decisions, as they share information, as they stretch people and invite people to grow. And I think we all, of course, have that capability to think of the way that we step into whatever organization and community matters to us right now as the most generative, loving presence we could be, which is how we might think of our personal ministry. And when I think of that and compassion, I wanted to share with you, excuse me, I recently, this summer, had the beautiful opportunity to walk on the hospice walk with my mother-in-law. And she was extraordinary in so many ways. And one of the ways that she carried out her personal ministry and that came back resoundingly at her memorial services and the stories that people shared with her family was that she very clearly but compellingly said it this way: I never know where the words, "How are you?" are going to take me in a day. And that, I think, takes us right into the idea of what might compassion mean in the context of our personally showing up with loving, generative presence to touch the people in whatever organization matters to us. And of course, there are Christian ideas of compassion, and there are compassion as a virtue, right, through the history of human thought. Every wisdom tradition recognizes compassion as important and teaches lessons about it. But as a social scientist coming at compassion not from a religious or wisdom tradition lens, but rather from looking at how do social systems take up and handle and repair and heal distress or fail to do that. We have come to talk about compassion as a 4-part human experience that can be shared between 2 people or across many people. And the 4 parts are that first we have to be willing to intentionally and mindfully, awarely be in the presence of pain and suffering. That's what distinguishes compassion from related ideas such as kindness, right? That compassion unfolds in relation to the distress and the suffering around us. And if we're willing to do that, then we have to become more intentionally capable about noticing when in an organization pain is popping up, when people are in distress, but in professional settings, right? And even in worship settings like this, where you try to put on your best face, right? And show up in a way that looks acceptable to other people, we hold back the signals that things are going wrong in our lives. And as we do that for very good reasons as social creatures, it becomes harder to discern at the collective level where is suffering and what is it creating. So we have to get better at noticing it if we want to build more compassion in our communities. And then as we notice it, as we notice the ambiguous signs, right? Somebody is showing up late time after time. Somebody says they'll meet you at service and then they stand you up and they aren't there, right? It's easy to get annoyed, right? I feel a little irritated with this behavior, but those are the kinds of signals that something is probably going wrong for people. And I talk about this a lot with people as trying to feel the times when you're about to start blaming, you're frustrated or irritated or something isn't going the way you want it to go, and just to take a breath and try to interpret a little bit more generously what might be going on for the other person, or how might I at least ask the question about what's happening for them. And that pausing ourselves in our rush to judgment or our first impression of someone else and their behavior is a great way, right, as you pose questions and get more curious, to get other people to be more generous in their explanations too. The third part of this human experience that all links together is feeling more empathy, but a particular kind of empathy that is concerned for the well-being of the other person, whether you even know them or not, whether you agree with them or not, whether you can feel what they feel or not. Compassion invites us to really have broaden our circle of concern for the people around us, right, in the human family. And then finally, of course, what most of us think of in relation to compassion and the idea of good deeds is taking action in relation to others' distress to help alleviate it. And so, as researchers have looked at what happens in organizations that get better at this, and when we're in the presence of compassion in work organizations, worship organizations, family systems, what we know is, of course, that for people who are suffering, receiving compassion helps them recover. It helps them cope better. It gives them more resources to handle what they're going through. But perhaps not unexpectedly in this context, but somewhat surprisingly for many people, being able to offer compassion and being an active agent in other people's benefit actually benefits us as actors so much too. So the research bears out that we get stronger when we think of ourselves as being able to be compassionate people. It makes us more satisfied and indeed more active and willing participants in the organizations that we work in. And if you're thinking of this in relation to work organizations, it also has the effect of helping people want to be part of that organization and want to stay. So it's an important aspect of work for many people. And then finally, for most organizations, I think it's so important to understand that we can actually, by being compassionate presences and showing up with our personal ministry, whatever that might be or mean to us, right? Create ripples of compassion that go far beyond us without ever knowing it. Because what lots of research is demonstrating in different ways is that simply by seeing compassion happen around me, whether I was involved or not, I feel like I would like to be a more compassionate person. I feel an emotion that scholars call elevation that makes me more likely to do other good works too. And my cynicism about the world and whether this darn organization could ever get its act together, right, starts to decrease, which in this polarized, divided, difficult world that we live in, so many things are increasing our cynicism, and cynicism drives apathy, right? We all become less likely to act when we feel cynical about life around us, about the quality of our organization, about whether our organization can actually walk its talk and do the things that it's supposed to do. So when we show up in a personal ministry of compassion, whatever that looks like to us, to intentionally be in relation with people who are in distress in a way that pays attention and offers a kind of capable comfort and care, we are increasing the capacity of the whole system to do better work. right? And whether we see that or not, it's happening across the way the system responds to compassion. Okay, that's your science moment. I'll try not to be so sciencey anymore today. So let me put my other hat on here, and I'm going to invite you to have a moment of reflection and then a moment to talk to someone near you about this, what you've just heard me talk about compassion through a social science lens. It blends with whatever else you know about compassion from your wisdom study, from your religious traditions, from your faith development. It's in some readings that I've been doing as I've been preparing for today. Some scholars call compassion a form of Christian intimacy, which I think is a beautiful way to hold on to this intentional stance to step into relationship with the suffering of the world. One of my favorite poems of all time, just disappeared from the screen. It's by an Arab American poet named Naomi Shihab Nye. It's called Kindness. It's a well-known poem. Many of you probably know it. I teach with it when I teach compassion, and I take liberties. So forgive me, Naomi. But she writes, I just replaced the word compassion with kindness for the purpose of our understanding, right? Before you know compassion as the deepest thing, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing, right? I think that, to me, is an idea to ponder and to reflect on and to say, how might that take me further into my understanding of what it means to have Christian intimacy with others I care about? So, that's my reflection question to you. You have a little reflection guide that you can take with you that has all these thoughts and questions in it if you'd like to have a look. But for now, just have a quiet minute and reflect on, what does it mean to you to think of being more intentional in your personal ministry, to step into relationship with suffering? And how might you do that in new ways, or challenge yourself to be more comfortable entering deeper into caring for the suffering around you?
Oh, gosh, I thought I was in trouble.
You're late. I was just saying, Sue, that we should all put our compassion hats on when people show up late. So, okay, so you had a moment to ponder this idea. What does it mean to you to hold this idea of compassion as a form of Christian intimacy? In the very first study that I ever had the privilege to do with Jane about compassion and work organizations, we heard this story that I'm quoting from here, from someone who worked in a university context. My wife and I lost 3 close relatives in 1 year. A lot of people came to our door and chatted about relatives that had died and so on. But one couple came to our door and wept. And I said, well, come on in. People are crying on your doorstep. What are you going to do? They came in and they didn't say anything. And it's interesting because at the end of the day, my wife and I would go over the days grieving, and the couple that really served us and cared for us and showed us compassion was the couple that said nothing but listened and hugged and wept with us. So, what might this form of Christian intimacy look like for you? Just turn to a neighbor, greet each other, and dive into this very deep question. so small. I apologize. I didn't realize how small it was going to come out.
Well, it looks like the slide.
Yeah, well, I made this separately, but I thought it was much bigger when I looked when I made it. Somehow
This is a pleasure.
yeah. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right. Well, that's all right. Our bulletins every week. I just love this new one. I actually saved it because the print is like double what it used to be. Oh yeah.
What I thought that was going to be like 3 times the size.
Yeah.
It's computers. They're wonderful when they work. They're wonderful. They're not so wonderful when they don't. I'm not sure how it would react to the people that
I'm not either because, I had that experience when my husband was wounded in Vietnam. People would call me and to express their sympathy, and then they'd just start crying. And I would end up comforting them.
Yeah.
And they were calling to comfort me. So, I mean, I didn't feel that was wrong for them to do that, but I don't know that I felt the same way as those people.
I would not have felt that way.
Yeah.
To me, in my traditions, my family, you bore up for everybody else.
But I think it's very valuable when you're grieving to have people share with you stories about your loved one. And I've tried really hard at sending sympathy cards now because I received them myself where they gave specific stories of my husband or my parents and how, what they meant to that person. So I try really hard not to just write my thoughts and prayers are with you, but to
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Because everybody, we're all sorry.
Yeah. And it really doesn't have to be really long. It can only be a few sentences. Like I remember the time when, they said this or did this.
Like my neighbor when my mom died mowed my grass, and I was so thankful.
Yeah.
Just the one time I just couldn't do it. I was so busy with the rain.
Yeah.
And it was just very nice of them. Especially because they don't mow their own. And I just needed one time. Well, they mowed about once a month.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you. I know, it's very painful to do this, but I'm going to interrupt your conversation. Gonna be as gentle as I can about it. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for your reflections and your sharing and your stories. Okay, here's what we're going to do next. If you can hear my voice, put your hand up in the air. If you can hear my voice, put your hand up in the air. I'm trying to apologize to you for interrupting you. So thank you for the reflection and the conversation that you started. It's not necessarily a small talk conversation, a way to meet your neighbor, but it's important to share our reflections on just in general what the word compassion means, because it's quite a complex concept. As you could see, right, like in a definition that a scientist might use, we have to have 4 parts and they all interrelate with each other. So when we're trying to understand how it plays out in our experiences and shaped by the organizations around us, it can get very confusing. And we were talking in the front row here about how in sometimes something that looks like compassion to one person would not be received as compassionate to another. So people showing up on your doorstep weeping at your loss might not be received by you and your family in the same way that that story shared. And that's part of the idea of we notice and interpret and respond in ways that build on our human wisdom when we're trying to be more capably in relationship with people in pain. And we're trying to help organizations be more capably in relationship with people in pain. So the second question that I'll pose to you today is, if you think of these four things and their interrelationship, how could we do them a little bit better? Personally, as part of our notion of personal ministry, but also influencing others around us or changing the way organization structures work so that we could do these things a little bit better. And if we do any one of these things a little bit better, because they're interrelated with each other, we actually boost the competence of the whole system to hold people's suffering with greater care and to be more likely to alleviate it. So the first thing that I said is, if we're willing to be in relationship with distress and the people around us, and our organization chooses to care about that, that matters so much. And then we have to notice, okay, what is it? What kinds of suffering and distress emerge around here? And what does it look like? And what are the small clues? And this is so hard. I mean, it's so much harder than it seems on the surface. And it's hard for a lot of reasons. I could spend the rest of our time together telling you them. But I just want to say that right now, in one way that it becomes really hard in our contemporary society and work is that we can't pay attention to anything for more than a couple of seconds at a time. Attention researchers who study human-focused attention find that in work contexts, people are changing what they're paying attention to on average every 14 seconds. And they're sitting there at their desk trying to do work, right? But the capacity for focused work in the age of technology and all the other stuff that goes on in contemporary organizations is very fractured. And fractured attention like that has all kinds of consequences for us. And it is especially difficult to notice the human state of other people around us. And so one way that we can get better in our personal ministries and also in influencing the organizations around us is just by reflecting on our fractured attention and trying to restore a bit more focus on the human condition in the organization around us. And so to kind of prompt your reflection on this idea that noticing, right, and noticing better is like a key act in increasing compassion. I chose this passage from the book of Luke, and I'm quoting from the Inclusive Bible here as I share it on the screen. I'm not a religious scholar, but I have read many interpretations of this story, which is a story you all know well. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and the disciples and a large crowd accompanied him. As Jesus approached the gate, a dead body was being carried out, the only son of a widowed mother. A considerable crowd of townspeople were with her. Jesus was moved with compassion upon seeing her and said, "Don't cry." Now, the story goes on and means a lot of things, right? And the emphasis in the story is often on the miracles that are produced. But in terms of our compassion lesson today, I want to just stop right there. And how hard is it to notice in a big crowd of people, in a melee with another big crowd of people where it's ambiguous what's happening, that there's one desperate, suffering person who needs your attention, and to stop all the melee in that noticing and to say, let me see you, as a person and your suffering and be moved to respond. And so in all the other things that this story might be and might teach us, I think it's also a noticing story, right? That noticing becomes the cornerstone from which everything else has to flow. Nothing else in that story is possible if there isn't that act of noticing at first. And so this calls for me to reflect on my own life, like, when am I so busy and so much in the melee that I am not paying attention to the quality, the human quality of people around me? And when am I being driven so fast to try to respond to so many things that I unintentionally, Freudian slip, I unintentionally get it wrong and I create pain for people that I love dearly? I just did this last week with Jane. I was trying to respond to something she offered to me really fast, and in my fast response, I was just not my best self. And it created a form of pain and suffering for me and for her. And then we're good at cleaning it up now, right? But it was partly the speed and the fractured attention and using technology in a way, like I didn't pause, right? And it happens to all of us all the time. And so this is your second reflection question, right? Like, how might you, in your personal ministry, in the people and organizations where you want to be of service, right? How might you notice more or notice better? And what is getting in your way? Take a moment to reflect on that. We'll have a moment of quiet, and then I'll let you go back to the deep conversation with your neighbor. How might you notice more or notice better? All right, please have a couple of minutes to share. And don't take the couple of minutes to look at your phones.
Well, I don't have my text turned on my email. Because you get so many.
When the guy came on to
All right. If you can hear me, put your hand in the air. If you can hear me, put your hand in the air. Oh, that time was more gentle. So thank you. Thank you for the conversation with each other and for the idea of reflecting on our own noticing about the human state of others. The next step in those 4 steps that I talked about is about as we notice that there's pain in our presence, how can we switch how we're making sense of it or how we are coming to understand it so that we're cultivating more generosity toward the people around us and the people in pain and ourselves as we cope with the situation. And this one, in organizations, it's really tough. I was on Friday morning with a group of leaders who were really, really dedicated to trying to make the work environment better for the people that work for them. And they were talking about a policy decision. And then one of them said, well, you know those 18-year-olds, they always will show up late. And this is a franchise business that employs a lot of young people. And it was like, on the one hand, they really wanted to make their workplace better and they were striving to change the work conditions. And on the other hand, they were telling themselves a story about their own employees that didn't reflect a belief in their capacity to be good employees, to show up on time, to deliver good service, to do what was expected of them. And this is just around us everywhere. These implicit interpretations that organizations give us that other people are lazy, or if we don't keep an eye on them, they will do the wrong thing, that left to their own devices, they'll take advantage of us or take advantage of the system. And so we need more monitoring and more control. And now, organizations are systems of control. We can't get away from that. That's what organizations do for us. But we have to build those systems from the perspective as much as possible, right? That people are essentially good, that people are essentially capable, and that they want to do what's best in the situation. And we have to get really rigorous about challenging the times that come up in us, in our study groups, in our Bible reading groups, in our classrooms, right, in our work environments, when we're sitting around the kitchen table, in our families, wherever it happens, when we start telling the downward spiral story about how people are this, that, or the other thing, it's a moment of generous interpretation. It's an opportunity for generous interpretation to pause, to get more curious about what other people are actually like instead of our judgments and stories about them, to ask ourselves questions about whether that's really true. And we have no way of knowing whether it's true or not. So is it in the service of a compassionate organization for us to tell ourselves that, right? And this is a discipline. I think this is a discipline of creating more compassionate systems. It's a discipline for ourselves, but it's a discipline because the way we choose to deploy our words, our stories, our metaphors, and our interpretations colors how everyone else around us is likely to think. And the more we're in higher status positions, the more we're regarded as leaders, the more important that is, because that word, that message, that story about whether people can be trusted or not to show up on time or do what we expect them to do, it's coloring other people's judgments and then flowing into their actions and the decisions that they make. So I'm not a preacher, but I sound like one right now. In the spirit of this point, I just wanted to choose this little snip from Khalil Gibran on good and evil. This is a tiny section of a longer teaching, but it captures this idea of the discipline of this. Being asked as a religious speaker prophet to speak on good and evil, his first response in this teaching is, "Of the good in you, I can speak, but not of the evil. For what is evil but good tortured by its own hunger and thirst? Verily, when good is hungry, it seeks food even in dark caves. And when it thirsts, it drinks even of dead waters." Right? So it's a different tradition. It's a different form of teaching, but it's, to me, poetically profound in saying, calling us to challenge any time we're invited to not be generous in our interpretation, to refuse, right? Of the good in you, I can speak. And the fact that I can't feel it right now and I'm really mad at you is just going to sit by the wayside, and I'm going to do my best to manage myself and the situation so that I can come back and see that was just good in you that was a little tortured. So, as you engage in more generous interpretations in work, in study environments, it shifts the sense of the relational possibilities around us. And that kind of interpretive discipline does invite us to go bigger in who we think belongs, right? And the way your congregation was telling the story today, from the very front of your bulletin to the first words that were uttered to all of us, right, about belonging and welcoming and having a home no matter what's happening. So you are very familiar with this idea of enlarging the circle of concern. You're doing it, we are living it and feeling it together, reverberating in the way the service that we sat in was constructed for us. It's just an invitation to think of it as happening not only on Sunday and not only in church. And I grew up in a tiny, tiny little town in the middle of the desert in rural western United States, and grew up Presbyterian. And it flabbergasted me as a young person why the really wonderful, good people that I knew really well, because it was a really small place and everybody knew everybody well, they could go on Sunday and proclaim a set of values that I could watch them not live on Monday under a different roof. And it made me so jaded about religion and about people for a really long time. So my walk to enlarge my circle of concern is real because I don't want to live that jaded life or think those jaded thoughts. And I don't want to only live my values one day a week or in one kind of building. And most of you who are nodding at me probably feel the same. So we work intentionally to enlarge our circle of concern. We invite ourselves to reflect on, right, how might we always participate in another's sorrow, even when we have no clue how they can think and feel the way they do, right? And in this moment in our democracy, right, there's a lot of us feeling that way about a lot of others of us, right? So I picked for you William Blake, a classic. Can I see in another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see in another's grief and not seek for kind relief? This is hard work and worthy of our reflection, but it is really, at the end of the day, if you want to celebrate your personal and organizational ministry, the most essential work, the bravest work, the heart of how we bring our loving presence to elevate the people and organizations around us and to build the kind of loving, belonging, welcoming society that we want to live in. And when you're feeling discouraged or it gets a little bit overwhelming, my last note of science is that there's a ton of really robust evidence, surprising, amazing MRI, fancy technology studies that demonstrate that if you give yourself 3 breaths before you send the text message, 3 breaths before you step up to the microphone, 3 breaths before you sit down to have a conversation with your partner at the breakfast table, whatever it is, the 3 breaths can make you braver, stronger, more likely to notice what's happening and to be able to interpret it generously, to not understand their point of view and see their humanity anyway, and all the other hard work that it takes to build a more compassionate society. So 3 breaths brave. Thank you all for inviting me today.
I hope you can see why I was so excited when Monica said yes. Yeah, let me just use this. Thank you, Monica. And this is from our adult faith formation. You love metaphors. And this is like meant to be a little thank you that has put for the light that you've put into our lives today. So thank you. And I also want to do this. Monica has this, but I forgot to show you. So we do have a book. If you got interested in this stuff called Awakening Compassion at Work that Monica led, that's I'm really proud to be associated with. But I'm also here to encourage you to come to the next 2 parts of this series on Awakening Compassion. Next week we have Jennifer Griggs, who's a member here, MD, who's gone coach, who does a lot of self-compassion work, training with people, and I think it'll be a wonderful session next time. And then Dave Vandermeer, our own Dave Vandermeer over here, is going to do something about awakening compassion through the arts. And we're actually going to be in the sanctuary, so we'll actually be experiencing a little bit, right, Dave? So please join us, and thank you so much for coming. It's been taped, so if you love this like I do and you want to share it, you can just pass a link on YouTube. If you go to this church's YouTube, all of most of the presentations are videotaped, and we often have as more viewings after than we do actually when people are here. But Monica's going to stay for 15 minutes. I know a bunch of you may want to go to the other service or to other happenings, but thank you for coming.